Yeah.
Welcome everyone to our fourth webinar of this biohacker experiment. I have connected all the way from Singapore, Scott Larsen. And today what we're going to do is go through the DNA active report. I've been very much looking forward to this webinar, to this event. And just to introduce Scott a little bit, he is from New Zealand. He's been in the triathlon youth team for quite some years. He's based now in Singapore, and where he runs his own sports science laboratory. And now he's of course, an APAC rep for Nordic Labs and DNA Life. So without further ado, Scott.
Thank you, and thanks for the introduction. Yeah, the DNA active test is something we're going to talk about today, and I think it's a really great starting off test for the biohacking experiment, but also anyone who's interested in their DNA to really pick up, take a few key takeaways that can be implemented. So without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get into a sample of this test. So within the DNA report, what we're measuring as a quick background is your genetics, and we're looking for the certain SNPs. And a SNP, there is a complicated term, single nucleotide polymorphism, but basically what it means is it is something that causes a different expression in your body, such as eye color. And it is the thing that means that your eyes are going to be a different color, such as blue as opposed to brown. So within the DNA active test, the result summary always looks like this, which is a fantastic place to start. Now, these are the broader areas, and there is a little bit of breakdown, especially on nutrition, to make it more specific. But if we start at the top on injury potential, I'll go down the report and we will look at each of these. So within the injury potential side, we're really measuring the genetic ability of your body to make collagen. Now, collagen is super important for many facets of your body, from cartilage, bones, connective tissues, skin, which is why it's so popular in skincare, strong hair and nails, and those soft tissues that are so important in sport. So our injury potential for this particular client is high, and that is a combination of these genetic changes or SNPs that we've measured here. And for a client like this with a high impact on collagen, there are a few things that I'm going to look at. One, what is their age? Two, what are the sports are they currently playing? And is there going to be a modification in the sport? Three, what is their background and what sports have they played growing up, which may help or hinder them depending on what their goals are now. Also, at this injury potential, it is going to matter how quickly you build someone up. So normally, if someone was high, I would take a build up much slower. So you would slow down the progression, give them a lot more rest to make sure that they're getting the recovery that they need. The third component here is supplementation. So I should have mentioned at the top, every single SNP and every single component we're measuring can be changed through either lifestyle interventions or supplementation or a mixture of both. So for collagen, we can obviously take various types of collagen. There is bovine collagen, or you can do marine peptide collagen, which is in the market now. And so these are supplements that you can take to help your body produce that collagen internally. Also, there's other things such as vitamin C, which is important to have to help collagen be made by your body, and also iron. Now, a lot of people, you should be getting blood tested every year, but especially for females, iron is a very important thing to be looking into, especially if they're sporty as well. So having an iron supplementation or ideally an iron infusion may also really, really help your collagen production. On the recovery component, exercise is not linear. If improvement in exercise was linear, the goal would be to do more and more and never have a rest day and just basically try to zoom up in a straight line. However, anyone who's tried to be on a rapid weight loss diet or something like this knows that that doesn't work too well. Recovery needs to come in. You need to challenge your body and create moments where you're overstressing your body. And that needs to be followed by a recovery period. So as a coach, this becomes quite technical. I'll try to keep it simple. There are really two key cycles in this. There's the macro cycle, which I would consider your week-on-week cycles. So you might have 2 weeks of loading or progressively overloading your body, and then 1 week where you really decrease the load, allowing you to recover. And then there's the micro cycle, which is within the week. You might do more training on Monday and Tuesday, followed by an easier day on Wednesday. So timing your training within the week, the micro cycle, is also very important to make sure you're healing during the week. You just can't stack heavy training sessions back to back to back. Your body will break down. And if you have a very high injury potential, stacking training, not getting your recovery is a huge risk factor around the injury potential component. So for recovery, these are the SNPs that we're measuring. And this person has an unfortunate reading. They are a slow recoverer and they are high for injury potential. So this is a double whammy. This means I need to be extra careful for this particular client or person who's going to be training for whatever event they're going to do. I'd also be, again, really depending on their background, but dynamic events, events that require a lot of loading are going to be the highest risk for this particular client because they just don't have that, genetically, they don't have that connective tissue to really facilitate and support such dynamic training. For this event, because their recovery is slow, additional things need to be thought about, which we'll address later on, but these are: what time are they going to sleep and how is their sleep? Sleep is somewhere when you're training, often if you're not recovering well, your sleep will be impacted first. Another thing that will show up first is also getting sick. So these are signals that would tell you early that the training load is too high. Things that you can do to really improve your recovery if you're a poor recoverer are things like ice baths are great and have shown to really improve recovery. Taking protein, we'll get to that later on, or getting correct nutrition to make sure your body's fueled helps with recovery. There are tools in the market such as pneumatic compression. These devices actually squeeze from your legs moving up to help circulate the blood, flush out lactic acid and clear your body. Red light therapy and heat saunas combined with red light therapy, these work your body in another way, but they can also help with recovery, especially directly after training. Andrew Huberman has done a fantastic clip about that. So I highly suggest you tune into his channel to get some of those deep insights on the science around those recovery tools. Exercise performance. So within us genetically, we are going to be predisposed for either power exercises or endurance training. Now, just because you are a poor power person, that doesn't mean you shouldn't or couldn't lift weights. Conversely, if you don't have great endurance skills, that doesn't mean to say you're never going to run a marathon. This really is indicative in trying to work it with your body's raw potential and making sure you're going to max out how good you are, or how much complementary training you should do for a sport. Let's say a sport I'm really familiar with, like triathlon. If you've got a lot of power in your genetic makeup here, you may want to complement a lot of your endurance training with quite a lot of gym work. That will really help you max out your endurance training. Whereas someone who doesn't have a high power potential may do all endurance training and they don't need to hit the gym almost ever. So really this play between power and endurance matters a lot. So in this person has a mixed profile. That means that they are equally suited to power and endurance work. Given that, looking at their prior markers, which were around recovery and also injury, I think a really good balanced style of workout would be excellent for this person. So spending a quality amount of time doing strength building work, whether that be in a gym, Pilates, yoga, those style of exercises to really help build all of the outer muscles and make sure your whole body's strong. Also balancing that with a quality amount of endurance work. The endurance work is probably going to be the thing that puts them over the top on the recovery. And another thing with the endurance work is often it's a repetitive motion. So whether that's swimming or cycling or any endurance sport, rowing, kayaking, because it's very repetitive, this may have impacts on their injury because of the collagen. So something to keep in check. A good balance is a perfect solution for this particular client. We do give indications of cardio zone training tables here. You can also do your own tests at home, such as working out your 1 hour maximal potential, and you can look those up online and work out your specific training zones, because the heart rate zones that are outlined here, 220 minus your age, is a very raw estimate. And you really need to make sure that your heart may be quicker than that or slower than that, and your zones will vary according with that. Peak training time. So we also mentioned before about the sleep being impactful for this client because of their recovery index. Peak training time is when this person should train in order to get the most out of their body. And again, in this report, it came up with no preference. So with no preference, given I know this person is a poor recoverer and also has high injury potential, I would be suggesting getting all of their training done in the morning. That gives the most amount of time through the course of the day for them to recover and heal. Also, it means that during the nighttime, they're going to get the maximum benefit out of their sleep in order to integrate all of that training work in the recovery cycle. So this will impact different people differently. I personally am a night trainer, but it's difficult sometimes after work to carve out that time, especially with a family at home. And you need to really, just because you are best at training at night doesn't mean that it's always going to be practical. But if you can, just try to stick to your clock gene and your peak training times to get the most out of it. Muscle cramping susceptibility is something we know a lot about here in Singapore. Obviously, when a lot of nutrients come out when you sweat, so you're losing magnesium, you're losing salts, you're changing the body's balance of that potassium in your muscles, and that can lead to cramping. And it's also genetically predisposition. So this person has a risk factor of muscle cramping. So again, there are things that we would add in for this person if you have cramping. One is thinking about hydration. And along with hydration comes electrolytes, amino acids, good salts, and making sure that you're getting enough in. So a moderate cramper, if they're playing squash or in a very hot environment like that in a hot country, making sure that they measure pre and post workout how much they're sweating, and making sure they replace not only the fluid, but also the goodness which has come out. So that is something this person would need to stay on top of. One indication will also appear for this person in their night sleep. If they started cramping at nighttime, this is an indication that they're not getting enough of the things they need: calcium, potassium, sodium, magnesium, BCAAs, etc., in order to make sure they stop cramping. So that's something I would definitely highlight to this client, because this will also affect their recovery. Caffeine metabolism. This particular SNP in the DNA active test works in two ways. One is how long before workouts you should have caffeine in order to get maximal benefit out of your workout. So caffeine's included in a lot of pre-workouts, but some people, this person's a fast metabolizer, so potentially 30 minutes before a workout, that would be a good time to have their caffeine. Remember, caffeine is not made in your body. It's an exogenous factor, and you only get it from either from drinking it or taking a caffeine tablet. So it is not made in your body. This person is going to take it right 30 minutes before the workout. If they were a slow metabolizer, they may want to take it a little bit earlier, 1 hour, 2 hours before they work out, to get the peak caffeine kick for their workout. Another thing for this particular client, though, given that they're so poor at recovery and sleep is such an important factor, I would definitely suggest that they don't take caffeine probably after 10 o'clock in the morning, no matter what. So if they choose to work out in the afternoon, I would definitely suggest no pre-workout. If they're going to do an afternoon workout, it'll impact their sleep too much, potentially. And that sleep is this person's gold nugget. That is where the repair is going to happen. You can track sleep. Wearables like this Oura Ring are super important to track sleep. There's other devices and other watches you can wear. You just want to keep on top of it, especially if your genetics look like this. Pressure response is called your big day response, and it really is a measure of how your body can deal with pressure. So this is an interesting SNP or result for this particular person. They have a high ability to deal with massive amounts of pressure. So these are often people that are type A personality, high performers, high flyers. The issue with having a high pressure response is they may be very gung-ho and aggressive in how quickly they want to get better, because they're used to pushing themselves hard and challenging themselves. Now, the fact that they've got massive risks around their recovery and also the collagen, so the injury potential, mixing that with a personality of someone who really wants to get ahead fast, is a situation for potential breaking, injury, training too much too soon. So this person needs to manage their ego a lot, really follow the process, believe in the recovery, believe that they need to take it step by step. A person with a lower pressure response may need a bit more cajoling into getting the training done and belief, making sure that they believe in themselves, and when the stressful situation comes along, develop better coping mechanisms, either through a meditation or something, in order to rehearse it a lot, so they're not overwhelmed in the stress situation. We dive into the nutritional components now, and remember that one of the great things about this test is it's giving you a broad overview of many different components that you can use in order to improve your physical fitness or performance. So nutrition, when you're young, I used to run around as a triathlete thinking nutrition probably was about 10% and training was 90%. I can say midlife now, nutrition's about 90% and training's about 10%. So it'll change over the course of your life how impactful this is. But without a doubt, the more I look into this particular component, one diet won't fit all people, and different factors are going to impact you. So this person performs moderately well on saturated fat. So saturated fats, the fatty meat coming out of a lot of the red meats, and also even fried food, which is typically considered bad, whole fat dairy, and coconut oil. So the very fatty foods, this person will deal with it moderately well. Carbohydrates, again, they are going to deal with carbohydrates moderately well. There's a lot of people out there that believe that you need carbohydrates in order to have energy, in order to perform and exercise well. Your body really uses two energy, or could use two energy systems to make energy. One is using carbohydrates. So in the Krebs cycle, it will use carbohydrates. The other energy system it can use is fat. And you can train your body to be better at using fat. And you can do that through restricting carbohydrates and also training at a lower intensity. So if you're choosing to do a sport which is more high intensity or weight work, for this particular person, balancing out the fat and also carbohydrates they consume is probably going to be a good balance. However, if they're looking to be more of an endurance athlete, even though they can use carbohydrates, what they might want to do is what's called carbohydrate cycling, whereas on their easier days, they use predominantly more fat at a slower speed. And then on their heavy days, where they're really trying to get the most out of their performance, they fuel with more carbohydrates pre and post, and that will impact their recovery potential as well. So there's quite a lot of nuance here. There's a lot to get out of this test, and we're still going. Exercising for weight management is something that many people are thinking about. And for this person, it's moderate intensity. So a 60-minute style exercise is going to be a good amount of time in order to hit a moderate intensity. You can't be sprinting for 60 minutes. So I think that looking at the fact that they were balanced with power and endurance potential, this person can do many modes of moderate intensity throughout the week. And some of them might be slightly more, some of them could be longer and slightly slower, but they're very balanced. So moderate intensity is what they should be doing in order to get the most out of their genetics. So down here, we always have recommendations of what you can do. So running, jogging, mountain climbing, rowing, cycling, swimming, circuit training, and tennis. Of course, there are hundreds more sports that would suit this moderate intensity. Monounsaturated fats. So this one is of low benefit to this person. So monounsaturated fats are used a lot in a Mediterranean diet, but it's a low priority. This person just is not going to use them very well. Polyunsaturated fats. So this one are your omega fatty 3 acids and basically are key in managing inflammation. This one has a confounding factor because remember, our collagen production and recovery are poor, which could lead over time if they are overtraining or not recovering to inflammation accumulating in the body. So keeping a high amount of polyunsaturated fats is going to be important for this client, depending on how much they are training. Fat is 2 times more dense as far as fuel goes when compared to carbohydrates. So you also need to think about fat on the macronutrient level, about how much is going in, because you can easily blow out how many calories that you're consuming a day if you are going to eat a lot of fat. This person is a hyper responder with protein, and that's fantastic because of their injury potential and their recovery issues. So I would suggest to this person having quite a high protein load, probably 2 to 2.5 grams per kilo of body weight. And I know that seems high, it's above the recommended limit, but given they're a high responder to protein, I think that's a good amount, and it's really going to reinforce all of those components around injury and recovery to give this person the best chance of progressing and making their gains. So looking at that diet as an entire snapshot, this person is going to benefit most from a higher protein diet with lower monounsaturated fats and a balanced amount of saturated and carbohydrates. And I would use those carbohydrates, like I said before, cycling them and making sure you're getting them for the key workouts of the week. So that is the DNA active test, a review of this client. And I'm going to turn it back over to Andrew to see if he has any questions around the test. Of course, this test sits among the other DNA Life tests, which are listed over here. And some of these tests go into a lot more detail and a lot more nuance, which really needs a qualified practitioner in that area to go over. But if you want something quick to get started with, DNA Active is a fantastic starting place. So I'll stop the share and let's have a chat with Andrew.
Wow, thanks, Scott, for such a great and insightful presentation on DNA Active. And I think one thing that I really like about understanding our physiology through our genetic predispositions is knowing how to adapt, our strategies, especially in relation to exercise, thanks to DNA Active, to better optimize, our performance, our recovery. And I think it's a test that's very useful not only for, athletes or recreational athletes, but maybe also for coaches or members of a athlete staff team, because
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll
I think,
say it's interesting. Sorry, it's interesting to see how maybe through their pressure response,
yeah.
for example, a psychologist, athlete psychologist would tackle, pre-game, mindfulness or mental concentration, or how would they psychologically approach, intense training.
Yeah, 100%. So I've really been reaching out to a lot of gyms, progressive gyms, boutiques, and those with quite a big background in sports science, and really showing them the application of, normally you might work out many of these components with a person you're training over the course of 6 months to 2 years. You will know they break down, you will know they get sick all the time. But why go through all of that when you can have a test like this done in 7 days? That's a turnaround of our tests. And it will give you the framework to really start upon. So then you don't need to make all those mistakes. So another application, I wish I had it when I was a young triathlete before I spent all of the time making all of my mistakes trying to be professional. It definitely would have completely changed that entire curve for me, and I could have done the right thing sooner.
I agree, and especially because in sports nutrition, there's a lot of things that we just decide based on trial and error. So a nutritionist or coach for an athlete will say, well, just after, half a season or X amount of time, say, wow, like my athlete really, cramps in kilometer 30 often in their marathon training. And well, we're going to try to, use this isotonic beverage with 6 to 9% carbohydrates in the form of maltodextrin, for example, just to really optimize their hydration. Maybe include some little bit of magnesium, some extra sodium, and whereas before they were just using water, right?
Right,
Water with some sort of gel in kilometer 20, if you want
right,
to put it that way. And it just changes your whole perspective and your whole tackle. And it just, like you said, it really optimizes your time you spend. Because after all, an athlete's career, if we're talking about elite performance, we'll say the maximum 10 years, if they have a very, very long career. And spending 1 2 years just really nailing down your strategy, really pinpointing tiny mistakes that we need to correct can easily be tackled through a test, and you'll get your results in 2 weeks, and it's just much more beneficial in that way. I have a interesting question. So imagine I were an athlete that would have a high risk in their injury potential.
mm,
And I was more of a recreational athlete in
yeah,
that sense. Would you recommend then more of a non-impact sports, right? Say more swimming or cycling, because if my collagen, response to exercise is it wouldn't be as good.
yeah.
Maybe an impact would have a lot of mechanical stress on my joints, my knees,
Mm.
whatever, hip. Would you maybe for that recreational athlete say, well, maybe try dig into, some swimming, other sorts of exercise?
Yeah, so I actually have a theory about this, which I have coined. I've never written about this, but it is something I want to put a book out about this. If we start from an endpoint, let's say when you're 90 or 100, or if you listen some of the longevity guys, 150 years old, what we want to be doing, we want to be able to get off the chair. We want to be able to lift up the something into the cupboard, and we want to be able to do basic movement. From that, if we take that as a starting point, really fitness comes out in a wedge from there. So if we were talking in the context of a recreational person who's 12 years old, please, with a genetic makeup like this, play squash, play tennis, do CrossFit, go for gold, do basically until you're 20, go ahead and do everything that you want to do. Maybe keep in context that you may be prone to injury, so the way you work out or how much you train might need to vary. But as you go
Mhm.
down that wedge, if you know you've got a genetic predisposition like that, such as me, I'm 40, and one of my mates says, hey, we should go and play a game of squash. And I haven't played
Yeah.
squash in 10 years. I, at the back of your mind, you have to you have to know that your risk profile is massive, and you
Mhm.
really need to make a decision at that point. Is the injury that you're more than likely going to have, especially if you've got poor collagen right there. Should we go and meet for a swim or a cycle instead, which, like you said, those are low impacts. So I think it's very case by case, and I think it's also time framed in that question. And I think really people need to check with themselves about their age and how fit and what they've done in the past, and really know their own body. Or if you don't know your own body very well, ask someone if they think it's a good idea, given this genetic makeup that you have.
Exactly. And I mean, of course, there's we're all talking about, it's not an exact science here. So we can't 100% predict this will happen or this will not happen. Of
Right.
course, if you haven't, for your example, if you haven't, played squash for 10 years and you have a high injury potential, you know, most likely nothing will happen to you if,
Yeah.
you play a game for one time and that's it. But, if you have a if you have a higher competitive edge, right, and your
Yeah.
pressure response might be a little hard for you to, maybe hold back and say, oh, and tomorrow we go again, and then next weekend, and then you overlap 5 really intense workouts in a row. Then who knows? After all, um,
Exactly. And people do break down. It's yeah.
mm,
And so if you as you get older, that risk just goes up because you're further outside the wedge of what's possible. But we've all seen YouTube clips of 100-year-olds sprinting 100 meters and doing gymnastics and really phenomenal people. These are the outliers. For most of those people, they've slowly built it up and they've been very consistent in performing those movements over a very long period of time. So
mhm.
again, it really comes down to how often and how frequent you're training and what you've conditioned your body to be able to handle.
Exactly. And in essence, that's part of our hacking nature, right? To
Yes.
understand ourselves, to know what our goals are, and then just to prepare for that whole environment.
So do you have more questions or
I think that's all the questions that I have.
okay? I wanted to touch on using DNA active in a school framework in order to do talent identification. Now, a lot of
Mhm.
people get mixed up. We're not going to be able to tell you if your kid's going to be a 100-meter like gold medalist or they're better at slalom skiing. What we can
Mhm.
say is that when you combine a DNA active test alongside body measurement testing and other known testing, which measures speed and power and agility, time reactions, things like this, when taken into an overall context, this
Yeah.
DNA active can add a genetic element to help steer a decision into a particular sports group. So
Mhm.
this becomes quite complicated because we're measuring different sports. It's rare to see, for example, someone on a basketball court who's under 6 foot. They do exist. They do exist in specific positions that really cater for that size. But
Yeah.
the nuance between should a young person pick up basketball or pick up volleyball,
Mhm.
this becomes very specialized, and the answer often is they can do both. What will they be better at long term will really come down to some very specific skills. So I
Yeah.
think DNA Active hasn't been used much in a talent identification program, and we would really love to reach out to schools around the world, probably starting from the age of 12 and then moving
Mhm.
up to university level. If they haven't had a DNA test done yet and you're doing many of these other things, I think it's a great time to have kids take the test, and then we really know how to map a lot of key components based upon genetics.
I agree, and I think it's a very interesting subject that you brought up because, I mean, if you ask for my opinion, I think that genetic testing is a fantastic tool in talent identification, right, for different sports disciplines.
Yeah.
Of course, there's certain, barriers or challenges we face in this whole aspect. Some of them are depending on the sport, the physiological capacities of a person will have more or less influence, right? It's
Yeah.
not the genetic impact will not be the same for a marathon runner than say a volleyball player because maybe a lot will have to do with their neuromotor reactions or their ability to just react to a ball, or maybe for a football player, how talented they are at reading the game, reading the
Mm.
pass. Of course, so there's many factors that intervene in sports talent. And when we speak about uh, elite sports success, there's also so many other factors that intervene, like their psychological health, right?
Yep.
Their socioeconomic status in relation to what sort of coaches or staff they're able to have around them.
Mm.
Just their preferences, their lifestyles, their attitude towards certain things. That all those things play a big role when it comes to deciding or just predicting if an athlete will be very, very good, elite at their sport. But that doesn't take away the fact that them having a genetic test to see how well they will perform at this specific sort of discipline will will play a key role. And there's also a pretty interesting moral dilemma to all this whole subject, because then again, if of course if a kid will want to practice, say, football, right, and he has pretty high injury potential, I mean, and of course it's wrong to say based on your genes you shouldn't be doing football. You should maybe be more looking into cycling, or swimming.
Right.
And of course that doesn't take away the fact that there's complete freedom as to what sport kids, teenagers, adults should do and should perform. It's all about taking into account, okay, what do you want with this genetic test?
Right.
Do you want to see what sport you will most excel at? And even if you don't have the genes for that, then it just means that you should just take a little bit of care, or, engage in the sport with a different mindset in relation to how you should recover for it, what sort of intentions you have for it. Is it to, reach a high level? Is it just for recreational purposes, right? So
Absolutely.
I don't think that those two factors clash.
No.
I think they actually complement each other pretty well.
Yeah, and you see all the time, a great example of that is a lot of people think great marathon runners must have massively high VO2 max levels. And it's Kipchoge at the moment, world record holder over the marathon, doesn't have an overly high VO2 max, but he has an incredibly high lactate clearance threshold and ability to maintain a pace and form. So it really, like you said, just because some variables may be seeming to hinder you in the short term, if you make sure you have the right people around you and put in the right mechanisms in place for recovery or whatever it may be that you might be lacking, you can sometimes those challenges make you a better athlete as a complete package. So you can go incredibly far. In fact, you can go all the way. So yeah, I think it needs to be taken into context with like many multi-factored about what someone really wants to do and then what they're good at doing.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that this runner had a poor VO2 max, but a really high lactate metabolism, because maybe his approach, to a long run would be to try and maintain a good pace that he knows he can maintain.
Yeah.
And then for the last X amount of kilometers, just really burn out, because he'll know that he'll be able to burn out more and quicker. Not burn out quicker, but maintain a really high, burnout speed for the last, X amount of kilometers than his competitors.
But
So it might give him an advantage in that sense. So knowing your own physiology will give you an advantage, to win the gold.
The whole principle there of like marathon running is who fatigues the slowest will win. Yeah. So if it's not 100-meter race, if we put everyone on the start line, we'd have a very different result if it was 100 meters. And I think most of the professional marathon runners could run as quick as he does over probably even a kilometer. They could all run quicker than he does over the marathon. He just fatigues the least. And that's what makes him the best.
Exactly. And the cool thing about the gene test is that we're able to more pinpoint it to our physiology rather than trial and error after X amount of marathons, right?
Absolutely.
All right, Scott. Thank you so much for a very insightful webinar and discussion that we've had. And I'll, of course, I'll post this to the biohackers, and if they have any questions, they can direct them to me. I'll direct them to you.
Sure.
I bet you that they'll be more than happy to hear from you, and if they have any inquiries.
Perfect. All right. Thank you very much for having me on.
Of course. Thank you.